Hey, it's Luminostic of Vilcabamba, Ecuador once again. Today we're going to talk about how to spot Shady Shaman. And when I say Shady Shaman, I don't necessarily even mean deliberately Shady Shaman, because I think, it's possible to be well-intentioned and delusional, and sometimes that is the most difficult thing to spot. I have been involved with plant medicine only for a few years now, and I have seen a number of disturbing things. Um, of course, I've had psychedelic experience since I was a teenager, but we don't really have shamans so much. It's generally just groups of people ingesting entheogens and kind of guiding themselves, or I would often take on that role. The point being that we don't really have these people that we're kind of looking to as a guide or a teacher, and I think there's some danger in that. So I'll give a couple of examples from my own experience. Um, One of them happened with a San Pedro shaman last year. The guy was more or less okay. He was not. He didn't have any bad intention. Uh, but and the main reason that I'm bringing up this anecdote is that one of the warning signs, I think, is in the beginning, if they're mentioning a certain um, if they're promising over and over again that they don't want to sleep with anyone, for example, then that should maybe raise your eyebrows. Or if they're trying too hard to gain your trust, which was really the only red flag with this particular individual, who turned out mostly to be okay. But after the ceremony, we left someone alone with him, and I think he suggested that his dog was trying to convince him to make the girl into a whore or something to this effect, which of course is not okay. So, and like I said, in the beginning of the ceremony, or before the ceremony, he was really going out of his way to assure us that he had no kinds of intentions along those lines, and you know. So there's that. If they're working too hard to gain your trust, this could be a red flag. Um, Also, obviously, reputation. Um, I think that a really bad shaman is going to get himself in trouble right away, and they're going to get excommunicated from a community. I mean, if you're down here in South America, they have ways of dealing with people that get too far out of line, and they will, you know. So I don't really think it's as much of a threat as a lot of people suggest. That there are like shady, dirty shamans everywhere trying to get your money and do terrible things to your mind or whatever. It's not so much the case. I think that in most cases, it's a matter of people being well-meaning, and maybe even subconsciously developing some bad habits. The human mind is an extremely complex and subtle machine, and I think that even when you're well-intentioned, ego tricks. There's all sorts of stuff that can kind of bubble up and create, you know, unintentional uh, damage to people. Another example that I have, the other day, I was speaking with a woman, and she was recounting her experience with some ayahuasqueros in Peru a few weeks ago. And, for myself, I have a background in, I've studied a lot of psychology, lots of experience with plant medicine and ceremony and psychedelics for decades. I've been in Masonic and Hermetic secret societies, and I've gotten training in consciousness from that. Um, so, I think I'm looking out for a lot of things and detecting a lot of things that a lot of people are not necessarily going to pick up on. Um, and I think that this case is one such scenario that the people may not have even had a bad intention with this. They may have been sincere, but ultimately what they did, I think, is not okay. And in this case, I think it was planting a false memory. And this is something that shamans actually have been known to do on purpose, and it's definitely something to watch out for. It's also, one of the reasons why I say that traditional shamanism needs to grow. I have worked with shamans that, at the very mention of science, they will become inflamed, incensed, like, how dare you? Um, or if you speak of ayahuasca and you speak of the chemical constituents rather than just the spiritual being behind it. So that's the point being that these shamans do not necessarily have training in psychology. They may not even know better than a lot of these faux pas that I'm illustrating. And so back to the current circumstance, this woman was a lesbian, and she said that she had gone into this ceremony feeling like she didn't really have a tremendous amount of trauma. She was a fairly balanced, successful person. She was just there more or less out of curiosity. But at some point during the ceremony, the shaman suggested that she had been molested and that she had suppressed this memory. And she said that her initial reaction was like, no, I really don't have any memory. I don't feel that that even makes sense. But, this was early on in the night, and she continued to meditate on this idea until it became a reality. And my feeling about it is that she was not molested. I think that these are often conservative people. Even amongst the indigenous, the Christian missionaries have had an influence. So from their point of view, they're thinking this woman has a sexual irregularity. She must have been molested. She has repressed the trauma. And so they planted this memory in this woman's head. Also, I noticed with her that she had put these people up on a huge pedestal, which is another thing that when I'm talking about Shady Shaman, everyone ultimately is their own shaman. So you must take responsibility for yourself, and you must go in forearmed. And, being aware that especially if it's your first time, ayahuasca has been clinically proven. Back in the 60s, I don't know that they have done any further experiments, but in a book by Gene Masters and Dr. Houston, they had done a bunch of experiments where, the capacity for harmala and harmaline to produce telepathy regularly in people was, I think they called it like a 99% success rate out of 1,000 trials or something. I mean, my point being that when you see a shaman become telepathic, and you absolutely know that he's done this, and he may know things that he has apparently just pulled out of the collective subconscious, it's very easy to put these people up on a pedestal and to think that they're more than human, that they're more pure than they are. I've even been guilty of this when I encountered the first really good ayahuasquero. It took me a while of really paying attention to notice things, that he is human, he is flawed, not everything he says is necessarily correct, and some of it may even be damaging. So you have to watch out for that, and this woman had definitely done that. These were the only people that she had ever been in an altered state with, and she just would rant on and on and on about how amazing and beautiful, and I'm not saying that that wasn't true to some extent, but I'm fairly convinced that they planted a false memory. And the reason that they may have done this on purpose, obviously, is that if they have nothing to cure you of and they want you to come back and continue spending their money, they're going to create something, convince you they have cured you of it, and then there you go. So the proper approach, from my point of view, would be that if a repressed memory bubbles up from the subconscious mind of someone participating in a ceremony, then we can address this. But to take someone in a psychedelic state that has made no suggestion of such a circumstance and to suggest it to them when you are in this role of priest teacher, this is not acceptable. So this, as I'm saying, a lot of the times I think, with shamans, it's not even so much that they they have any bad intent, but you have to remember that they don't have any training in psychology. A lot of them are just seat of their pants, and even demonstrating a capacity like telepathy does not mean you're dealing with a legitimate shaman, because the chemicals in ayahuasca bring down filters that allow other people's alpha waves to be picked up and interpreted by other minds. So it's just very good to go in with an open mind, but lots of skepticism, and really pay attention to what's going on around you. Another case that I am aware of, there was a guy here that was working with an ayahuasquero who I do respect, but he prematurely decided that he was himself a shaman, and that it was time for him to go off into the jungle and cut down a bunch of ayahuasca and go and have his ceremonies. For me, observing this guy in a ceremony, it was clear I only had to talk to him for a few minutes at a time, or a few minutes one time, to notice something wasn't quite right. How it is that 10 or 12 people followed this guy into the jungle to drink anything with him is totally beyond me, but it definitely happens. And in a case like that, it's difficult for me to comment on because to me, the inflated ego was very obvious. The disassociation from reality. Um, all of these things were very clear, but it's hard for me to communicate to someone else that can't read those signs how to read those signs. So that's a difficult one. Um, but in his case, he turned out to be not really uh, ready, and there was some damage that was done. People definitely suffered. So as far as screening out guys like that, I mean, I just hope that, you have to look into people's eyes and really just ask your intuition and your heart. In that guy's case, I think maybe there were other people around that kind of believed in him and they vouched for him, and that led other people to go off and follow him, and it took disaster to strike before he was stopped. Um, and I guess the last thing I have to say about that is that in my experience, Pachamama, the spirit behind ayahuasca, doesn't necessarily lie. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can believe your own interpretations of what you receive from the medicine. And I have seen on several occasions this last guy that decided he was going to go do ceremonies before he was prepared. His ego was inflated by the medicine. He believed that the medicine was doing him good, when in fact there are certain psychological and emotional, I don't want to say archetypes because it's more of a disposition, I guess, that the medicine actually is not good for you. At least, too much of it. Maybe it's part of your path to have your ego blown up and to go with all the catastrophes that come from that. Who am I to say? But it's definitely something to watch out for. There was another instance, this is the last horror story that I'll share. A guy came back from South America and he had got some devotees, and he tried to convince me to give him $1,000 for a stack of papers that at first he said, I want to give you this stuff for free, I just give it to everyone for free, it's my mission. And you are owned by the United States government, that's what your social security number is. And if you just learn about these laws, then you never have to stop at another stop sign, or you can't be convicted of a crime and all this crazy stuff. And I noticed that something was off. I noticed the blank stares of this little cult that he was starting to develop. As I was talking to him, I noticed more and more cars were arriving. We were at an event and he had been putting flyers out and people were coming to listen to him speak. And I said, well, where have you gotten all this from? And he said, well, when I'm out there on ayahuasca and I'm just, and it's just coming and I'm like, what is this noise you're making? What is it, what is it of value that you have? And all I got was a blank stare. And then the ego, I said something along the lines of, well, then you must be the most perfect person in the universe. And he said, I will not dispute that. And as I was leaving, I said, this is amazing. You guys are just eating his shit up, and he is completely out of his mind. 2 days later, I got a call from somebody who was there, and apparently the guy had put his feces in the stew and literally fed it to these people. So, the warning there is that, there is some danger in the medicine. My experience has been very healing, and the experience of, I would estimate, probably 95% of the people that come into contact with ayahuasca, even if you don't have the best shaman, you're still going to release traumas and gain, but, you must be very cautious and really take the time to listen to your heart and evaluate before you head off into the jungle with someone. So like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.